The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. It is Wednesday, which generally means you're stuck with Dan, me, talking about sports betting by myself. Gets a little bit tedious, mundane, but not today, my good people, not today. We are joined for the first time on Fantasy NBA Today by Hoop Ball expert Zach Feldman, who is an expert in many things, and many of them things that I don't fully understand. So, Zach, welcome to the podcast, and I bow before you here because I think you're about to school me a little bit.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Adrian can't say it anymore, but thank you for having me.
That's right. If he's a co-host, he's not allowed to say it. You're allowed to say it because you are an esteemed guest of the pod. Zach, of course, writing for Hoop Ball. You've got a bunch of articles coming out in the not-so-distant future. You're also You're a little bit of a multi-sport guy, although I know it's not a fantasy thing, so I do want to get a bit into how you got into this mess. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody, this is, of course, a Hoop Ball presentation, hoop-ball.com. Go ahead and check all that good stuff out. The draft guide, my heavens, you've got to check out the draft guide. Zach, I assume you've got a hand in this, right?
Oh, yeah.
What have your focuses been for the draft guide while we're hyping it up this week? It's draft guide week on the pod.
I actually didn't do too much work in the guide. I've just been reading it, and it's fantastic. I mean, just as everyone has been saying, it's great. Rankings, projections, more to come with the Brewski 150. It's exciting. Mock season is here, so it's all a lot right now.
Did you change your Twitter handle? I thought I had it in front of me ready to go for the podcast, but then when I click it, it disappeared.
Yeah, I did.
All right, so what is it now?
It's Zach Feldman 3.
Zach Feldman 3. I had ZF_analytics all ready to go, and I was right in the middle of the podcast just clicking on it. It's always good to double check before you say something live on air, and then it went away. So that's without any underscores or anything like that? ZACHFELDMAN 3?
Correct.
All right, beautiful. So you can give Zach Feldman a follow on Twitter at Zach Feldman 3. Hey, if we followed you before, do you know if that automatically transfers over? Because I'm pretty sure I did.
Yeah, it should.
Okay, excellent.
If you have a check mark, it goes away if you change it, but that's definitely not me, so I'm good.
One day, my good man. I'm still hunting for my own. So anyway, you can follow us on Twitter at Dan Besbris. You guys know if you can spell it, you can find me. And likewise for Zach, basically, provided you can also add the number 3 to the end at Zach Feldman with an H, not a K in that first name. And then the number 3. That's the Twitter handle. At Hoopball tweets at Hoopball Fantasy. If you want to check out the draft guide, it's $13.99 right now. Limited time. It was $11.99 over the weekend, went up to $13.99, and it will continue to slowly go up to full price, which is $17.99 over the course of the next couple of weeks. That's the way we've always done it here at Hoopball, is the big deals are for those who get it right out of the chute. If you are a return subscriber, you should be getting $2 off. If that didn't happen for you, make sure to let Hoopball know before you actually buy the item. That will make your life a little bit easier, although I think if you get it, Brew can also get into the back end and fix it from there as well. Draft guide is outstanding. I mean, my thing with the draft guide, and I know I've said this on each of the first 2 shows this week already, I just cannot wait for the ADP analysis. That's my stuff. That's Panda puts that out. It's so useful for me. It's like easily the most important part of how I get ready for a fantasy draft. I know it's not really relevant right now on August 28th, but it will be. Zach, what's your favorite part of the draft guide?
I think for me, it's probably the 150, just because Aaron loves to go bold, but he's obviously so sharp with it that there's a lot of places to find value and kind of exploit the rankings on each website's draft app with that. And, as an analytics guy, I love the value, of course. So I just love the comparison. I'll throw it in a spreadsheet and then find the differences between each site and see which ones are consensus best values.
Yeah, Aaron's stuff scares me sometimes. I love it. I mean, he is so bold. He is so risky. But you almost, for me at least, I often have to take all of our like big hoop ball shots, and I have to be aware of who I'm drafting against, right? And that's why, to me, I love that ADP so much, is you can take the B150, and if you just sort of understand the people in your league, you got to be careful not to overdraft these guys. Some of the keys to his bold stuff is how late you should be able to get those dudes, right? Like, you should be able to get a guy like Joe Ingles at 120, 130 last year. And just because, maybe that's the point to make here, Zach, is just because a guy is projected to be a top 50 guy, that doesn't mean you want to draft him in the top 50. That just means this is a guy you should target, but you still got to use other tools to figure out where you should take him in your draft, right?
Exactly, yeah. So if Aaron has a guy 50, let's say, like you were saying, and his ADP is 120, and if you come up at pick 50 and take him there, you're not getting any value. You're buying at market prices, and there's no point in doing it because you should be able to get him later. So if you wait until maybe cut the difference at 75, 80, now you're getting value, but you're still not overdrafting him and sucking all the value out of it.
All right, Zach, you got some stuff rattling around in that dome of yours, and I want to see how much of it we can peel out onto the podcast without making my eyes buzz in my head a little bit. You're an analytics guy, and for a lot of basketball people, you hear that word, and it gets you a little bit nervous. So stop me if I'm asking stupid questions. I give you full permission to say, stop, Dan, that's a stupid question. But I want to just get an idea of, number one, your background, and number two, sort of how it all ties in from a basketball side, from a fantasy side, and then I also want to get your take on how it ties in on a sports betting side. That's my three-pronged approach to today's podcast with you. Before I totally wear you out here, so what's the background, Zach? How did you get into fantasy sports? How did you sort of take this more advanced stat look, this numbers look at basketball that not everybody in the fantasy world takes?
So I've been playing fantasy sports, I think, my whole life. I can remember playing fantasy football with my dad since I was probably 5 or 6. We used to share a team, going against him and giving him advice at the same time when we're in the same league. So I have to, temper what I actually tell him versus too much what's not enough, because he is my competition now. But, I played sports growing up. I was a baseball player. Parents wouldn't let me play football. I wasn't athletic enough to play basketball. I was pretty short growing up. So, I've loved sports my whole life, but then on the other side, I was always a math kid in school. Numbers and logic kind of just made sense to me more than emotion or something like that. But, when someone says analytics, sometimes people in the sports world will take a step back.
I know you're talking about Charles Barkley right now.
Or writing about him too. But I'm excited about that one. But people kind of get lost in what it actually is. And if someone doesn't really believe in analytics, then it's not to be harsh, but it's just a little honestly, just a little stupid, because if you're taking in extra data, there's no only upside. So
right, sorry to jump in here. I just, when I hear you say that, it makes a lot of sense where, ignoring something is you're hamstringing yourself. There's no reason to just ignore data. You can choose whether or not you want to use it once you see it, but you might as well look at it, right?
Exactly. So, and what analytics do in sports is they either confirm what we think or they show us a different angle. And if you're willingly saying that is stupid, it doesn't work, and you don't want to use it, then like you said, you're hamstringing yourself. You're just being short-minded and you're not adapting and innovating. So if you're not using analytics, you're relatively falling behind. And we can see that with, in the MLB and NBA, it's basically in every clubhouse, front office, whatnot, but you can really see it if there's any football fans listening with the teams that heavily use it versus the rest of the old school NFL that hates it because they're scared they're going to lose their jobs.
I know a lot with your Twitter logo at least used to be a little picture that said "Never Bunt." So,
right.
We can see the impact there very quickly. And I love talking about baseball on this thing. I was a minor league broadcaster for a decade before getting into the fantasy side of stuff. So, and you were sort of encouraged on broadcasts, if you were to bring up advanced stats, to really keep it as rudimentary as humanly possible, because there is that here comes, nerd talk 101. And people have a tendency to kind of glaze over a little bit. So that's why I think maybe if we do this in little steps, and we're going to put our toe in the shallow end on today's podcast, and then maybe we're going to get the whole foot in on the next one. And you also, before we came on air, Zach, you told me you have a couple of features coming out on the written side for Hoop Ball. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, so those, when I started with Hoop Ball, it was more of, on the website where, the section of we're always looking for the best writers and thinkers. It says, sometimes you don't really have a spot, but reach out and maybe we can find one. And that's more of where I fell in. I just, I like numbers, I like sports. So I figured, maybe I could take a shot at a writing side. And that's where I kind of found my angle with analytics here, is because we didn't really have too much on that. And, the value I'd bring at writing just another fantasy weekly article wouldn't be as good as maybe, venturing off into something with analytics and, presenting it and getting people more involved with it. Like you said, that's something that used to be discouraged and still probably is within announcers. So, dipping your toe in the water is obviously a good first step, and, hopefully it expands.
Okay. So without terrifying anybody and creating waves in the ocean here, what do you think is, and I hope this doesn't put you on the spot at all, but what do you think is sort of the simplest way to introduce somebody to advanced stats in basketball? Like what's a pretty basic advanced stat that most people, maybe they even know already, but they don't realize that it functions in that way? Or maybe it's one that they haven't heard of. That's one that would be pretty easy to digest. What do you think would be, like if somebody walked into your classroom that you were teaching on NBA advanced statistics, and you were like, okay, here's the first thing I'm going to tell you. I promise you're not going to be terrified, but it's going to help you look at the game in a new way. What's our toe in the water subject for today?
I would say the two biggest sides, which we've obviously seen the last few years, and I'm kind of just verbatim copying this from Sam Hinkie and Daryl Morey, is that 3 is more than 2, and defense is poorly measured in numbers. And a lot of the times with the 3-pointers, people view it as it's only 1 more point than a 2, but when you effectively view it as it's 50% more, that's a whole lot. And when you can see that you're getting 50% more on that shot versus a 2, you then realize how less you have to be successful to equal the value. So if you're shooting 50% on 2-pointers, you only have to shoot 33% on 3-pointers to get, that same expected value out of it.
Okay, so then there's probably a tipping point somewhere, right? Where like somebody shooting from the free throw line, is that better than a 3-pointer because of the percentage chance that the shot might go in? I assume that, for someone like myself who's just like, okay, I understand this stuff at a very basic level, a long 2 has a pretty close to the same probability to go in as a short 3. So that's a very obvious jump. Hey, I'm standing on the 3-point line. This shot is worth 2 points. I might as well back up 4 inches, and the shot's going to be worth 50% more. Or do I get 11 feet closer and take a high percentage 2? Is there an obvious break point there? Is that, Or is that really basically what the Rockets are doing? They're like, we want layups and threes.
Right. So, that's what the Rockets are doing. And, theoretically, the closer you are to the basket, the easier it is to make. And if you look at, some of the shot charts and heat maps, it gets brighter, the more shots there are in that area. If you look at the Rockets, it's bright red right underneath the basket and then bright red right out along the arc, and especially in the corners, because the closer it is, the easier, and the corner three is the shortest one. So they're emphasizing get as close to the basket as you can, unless it's obviously a three-pointer, get as the closest you can on threes and avoid the long two, because you can either get a better two or a three, which is also better than that mid-range or long two, like you said.
So the defensive side, that one I don't even really know what the right question to ask is. If looking at numbers is the wrong way to measure defense, how do we measure defense? Do we just have to watch a boatload of tape?
Yeah, that's one way, and that's, part of analytics is watching tape. You can never have one or the other, and that's what any analytics person will tell you is analytics is a tool, and that's what someone like Charles Barkley will tell you otherwise, is it's 100% not analytics is the way to do it. But in terms of defense, so much of defense is a team game with whatever scheme they're being run with, the how the players talk and work with each other together. And then also what we use right now are blocks and steals, and those are not indicative of good defense being played. You can be lazy and get a block or a steal and give up easy baskets as well.
So who's a good example of somebody who maybe gets a fair amount of blocks and steals that is in reality kind of a crummy defender, and then vice versa? Maybe there's somebody out there that almost gets no blocks and steals but is actually a very good defender.
One name that comes to mind is probably Serge Ibaka. Not that he's bad, but I think, he used to be averaging 3+ blocks a game back in his prime, or what ended up being his prime.
Well said.
But his defense was probably a little overrated at that time. And then similar to a guy like Hassan Whiteside, his blocks have gone down recently, and his defense has actually improved. And that's one thing that Coach Spoelstra has helped him with is, he realized you don't have to block a shot to make sure it doesn't go in. And a lot of times when you go for the block and miss, you're giving up that easy basket, where if you stay and contend the shot, you get a miss with an easy rebound.
Well, that's unfortunate for those of us who like to play fantasy sports.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do you, this is my segue point here, how do you reconcile some of that stuff with the fantasy side? How, is that, with baseball, to me, it's, and maybe this is just because I grew up on baseball and baseball is so numbers heavy, but one of the things that baseball advanced stats have taught us is that everybody basically regresses to the mean. And it's something that we knew, but these advanced statistics paint a much clearer picture of how you can kind of expect a certain result over that long grind of a baseball season. BABIP is one that people always gravitate to because it's easy to understand. It's easy to understand that that's how luck has been able to factor into things, and you can almost then sort of pull luck out of the equation. What about basketball? Is there a way to use advanced stats to maybe trade for someone mid-season who certain statistics show that the numbers that you're seeing on the court maybe don't tell the entire story? Or is it something where maybe you can extrapolate to growth as a player if you're in Dynasty or you're taking a flyer during draft season? How can we take some of these extra pieces of knowledge and apply them to the fantasy side of things?
Well, sometimes, like with the Whiteside case, sometimes it hurts us. And then other times, there's a lot of models out there. I know Kevin Pelton's is pretty popular, especially around NBA draft season with, his projections of the combination of AAU stats and college stats. And then if they're from Europe, is, those stats as well. And to see what kind of production you can expect for for their first, I believe it's 5 seasons. It's either 3 or 5 seasons. And then he also did a study on just the average value of each draft pick, or draft pick slot, that is, and how, the public tends to overrate guys outside the top 3, but still in the lottery, because we think that since it's a lottery pick, these guys, any one of them can become a superstar. And while that's true, we lean that way more often and are disappointed more than we should be based on expectations. So that's why, rookies are usually not great bets for fantasy, although Luka Doncic is already my favorite player in the league, and I want to own him everywhere because I love him. But other than that, I'm not sure how many rookies I'll be looking at. They tend to be, if it's the last round, sure, take a flyer on them because they, theoretically have more upside than someone we already know about. But when you're talking about, like baseball with BABIP, that's something that has been used in tweets to show luck and how it's going to fare over a season. And that's a little easier with baseball just because there's so much one-on-one, just pitcher versus batter. And with basketball, you can still do it just because it is an 82-game season. But for the most part, since basketball is just such a different animal because there's less parity in it systematically. So because there's 82 games combined with a higher score, there's scoring up and down the floor every time, and you have, total scores in the 200s. Each team has 100 possessions a game. That brings in, which in stats is the law of large numbers of, over time, things regress to the mean, whether positive or negative. So we can see it, but systematically it's already built in, so it's not going to be as extreme.
Well, and that is where I'm going to put a very small lid on the analytics stuff, because I started to get a tiny bit confused, and that means that next time we get to dig a little bit deeper. But I'm not letting you go just yet. Again, talking to Zach Feldman, a hoop ball analytics expert. I know, we got a new one on the prod. We got a fresh meat. He is, again, at Zach Feldman 3 on Twitter. We don't have a ton of time left on today's show, but I do want to hear your thoughts on a couple of season win totals, because that is a place where you are really talking about that kind of large numbers situation. You're talking about in a full season length wager where you have an idea about things, how things might go. Your stats, your advanced numbers can tell you a little bit maybe about how certain players might mesh, what teams may have added pieces that seem really interesting but that might not be, where there's addition by subtraction type of stuff on the floor. I had many a discussion with my good buddy Gil Alexander over at VSiN about a guy like Cristiano Felicio of the Chicago Bulls, where, we talked about, I think when Niko Mirotic was out, we talked about how he got traded and how things changed a bit for Chicago and how they got a heck of a lot worse. And he was like, well, it wasn't just that Mirotic was traded, it's that Cristiano Felicio is technically the worst player in the NBA based on what the advanced stats were saying. So it was kind of a double whammy. Okay, all that sort of rolled into a bag for you, Zach. You have these numbers that you can add to existing stuff. What are maybe one or two of your favorite season-long win total wagers, and then we can dig into them a tiny bit?
Well, it's good that you brought up Felicio, because that's a good transition for me. I agree with your Bulls over 27.5. Hopefully Felicio doesn't play that much. But 27.5 it's just too low. I mean, they're a team that's going to actually try, as opposed to last year when they were in tank mode, almost admittedly, and almost got fined for it for openly sitting players.
And they still went over, by the way. Trying to lose last year, they still went over by 5 wins.
Well, I'm from Chicago, and that's the story of the Bulls is Gar Forman and John Paxson are so bad they can't even tank right. But you get Levine with a full off season, and his numbers weren't great last year, but that's, I can kind of throw those out the window because he's coming into a team trying to lose, coming off of an ACL, and he's in a contract situation. So you can kind of see if he maybe pushed it a little bit, but he still looked like he had the athleticism. Jabari Parker comes in. I know the fit doesn't seem great on paper, but to hit over 27.5, you don't have to be good on paper. I mean, you can hit over 27.5 and be a really bad team still.
as we saw with Chicago last year, although they hit 27. So, that's trying to lose. They got to 27.
Exactly. I love Wendell Carter. He was one of my favorite prospects. I did I was the one that wrote the mock drafts for NBA draft season for us. I don't think you're a big draft person, admittedly.
No, I'm Rick Carlisle over here. I don't touch those rookies. So when you were talking about that, by the way, a few moments ago, yep, I'm right there with you, man. You know me. Rookies are the worst.
Yeah. I do like Wendell Carter, though, for the Bulls. He was one of my favorite rookies in this class. I actually like him a lot more than his Duke teammate, Marvin Bagley. And I think even if he doesn't play a ton, he should have a net positive impact on the floor just because of how smart he is and how much he impacts on defense. So I think over 27.5, that line might have moved at some places already up a little, but a team in the East that's trying to win, that's almost a surefire over, I want to say. There's enough bad teams that you can scrape together wins, even if it's at the end of the year.
So what about from the advanced stat side? Does something jump out at you on Chicago, or is this one really more about like fit and gut and just the narrative side as well?
That's probably more narrative. Like you said, they were at 27 last year, and that was with half a year of Levine. That was with Felicio playing. He started a few games, I'm pretty sure. Lopez and Holiday sat out a little. And analytically, this team might be a little ugly or potentially a lot ugly with Zach LaVine and Jabari Parker playing the 2 and the 3 on the same court together. And I don't know if they realize there's only one ball at a time. So we'll see how that works out. But it should be enough raw talent between them with Markkanen, Dunn, Carter, Lopez until they trade him to get over the small number.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I ran into, and I think I mentioned this when I talked about the Bulls, was I started to overthink it a little bit. Like they hit 27, and then I wondered, why is this number so very reasonable? Why does it feel so low? And the only thing I could think is that maybe the general betting public just doesn't understand what the Bulls went through last year as much as those of us who watch them on a night-to-night basis to understand that they traded away Mirotic, who was probably their best positive impact player at the time they traded him. They benched Robin Lopez for a month and a half. They benched Justin Holiday for a month and a half. They played Zach LaVine for like 2 months in the middle of the season and then shut him down. And Chris Dunn didn't start the year and he didn't finish the year. It was really like just Markkanen for that team last season, and they still got to those 27 wins. And I think people see this team and they're like, well, look at all these guys. They only had 27 wins. They had all these players, but not understanding that, a lot of those guys played 40, 50, 60 games, not 75 or 80. That's a big deal. A little bit of health goes a long way in the NBA, and it's pretty easy to go from 27 to 28 wins. A lot easier than it is to go from, 54 to 55. There's so many more games where you can pick off one extra victory.
Exactly. And even Markkanen, like you said, he missed some time too with a back that they said, or they hinted that if it was a season they were trying in, he's probably okay to play, but there was no reason to risk it. And this season when, the front office wanted a quick turnaround, and I think that the fact that they let Nwaba go to secure LaVine and Jabari Parker is a sign that they're kind of aiming more for the playoffs rather than go full 76ers and go for a championship. So I think they're going to be back into trying to win mode, and over 27.5 is just too low for a team that's trying to win in the East that has that much raw talent.
Next show, Zach, we'll get into bet number 2. Zach Feldman, thank you so much for gracing us with a little bit of Brainiac time on the pod.
Thanks for having me.
He is Zach Feldman at Zach Feldman3 on Twitter, ZachFeldman, the number 3. A pleasure, a true pleasure. Cannot wait to have him back. We'll dig in a little bit deeper. I might actually have to do a little bit of research, get ready for another show on analytics so I can ask the right questions, not sound like such a dullard. So given we have a couple of minutes here at the end of the podcast before we wrap things up, I want to remind everybody what's coming up the rest of the week and give you one more season win total out of the Dan Besbris bag o' tricks because, well, frankly, we had 6, I believe, teams to cover on a last podcast, which would have been Portland, Sacramento, Toronto, Utah, Washington, and San Antonio. That was the one that I was forgetting in there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the team that I have absolutely no feel for. No, I lied. We'll save Sacramento for the last one. You guys know my motto, no kings allowed. But we can't do that, right? It's sports betting. You'll have to wait until Monday to find out how I feel about the Kings. We're going to keep going in alphabetical order, so we are talking about the Portland Trailblazers with a number of 41.5. It is a weird number. It is a low number. They had a number of 42.5 last year. They got to 49 wins and the 3 seed, which feels all kinds of weird, right? Why would a team that exceeded their number by 7 wins the previous year get dropped by a full win the following season? Here are your reasons and why we actually like the under. The Portland Trailblazers are looking down the barrel at an under. Reason number 1, Damian Lillard has been slowly showing signs of wear and tear. I know he hasn't been in the NBA for all that long. This will be only his 7th season coming up, but 82, 82, 82, 75, 75, 73. That's the numbers right now for Damian Lillard. The numbers, they are going down. The minutes, they are not. He's being asked to do more and more seemingly every season. Last 3 years in a row, he's taken almost 20 shots per game. He's playing almost 37 minutes per game. That is about to take its toll. This is a guy that, big-time fantasy numbers. Make no mistake. He is also one of the best free throw positive guys in fantasy circles. He had one of his best defensive seasons last year, averaging 1.1 steals per game and 0.4 blocks, both above his career marks. This was the as good as it gets kind of year for Dame, and unfortunately, that's why you have to fade a little bit. He was up near his career high in field goal percentage as well, so percentages were all among the highest of his career. Shot his best mark from 2-point land this most recent season. 3-point number was basically right around his career mark, if even maybe a tiny bit below it. 8.6 threes per game he was taking this year and didn't see a big-time negative impact on his 2-point numbers. On top of everything else, Portland lost a couple of their key guys from last year. Ed Davis, big-time contributor off the bench in the front court. Shabazz Napier, big-time contributor off the bench in the backcourt. Both went to the Brooklyn Nets. Portland is hamstrung financially. They're not going to be able to add a ton of stuff. Yusuf Nurkic is not a game-changing talent. He's a good center, but we've seen that he can't really keep it going for long stretches. He also tends to fall into that kind of banged-up territory. He's also injury-prone. There are just too many things missing from this Portland team and not enough flexibility in the front office to do anything about it. They are a team that, much like Indiana, a team that exceeded expectations last year and is due to come back to earth a little bit. CJ McCollum, by the way, 80, 80, and 81 games the last 3 years. He's due to miss a little bit of time as well. So to me, this is a situation where Portland is not going to be able to win as many tight games as they had last season. A few of those close ones are going to go the other way. You do have to obviously give some credit there to Damian Lillard, right? Like a team, you look at how Portland fared in terms of how they played offensively, how they played defensively. 49 wins. You could argue that their season was less impressive than the Thunder, then the Jazz, then the Spurs, pretty close to how the Wolves played last year. Pretty close. Well, not really too many comparable teams out east. It's just a different bird. If they play that kind of basketball again this following season, they're not going to find their way to 49 wins. And I think on top of everything else, they take a step back. Denver gets better. Minnesota stays the same. San Antonio gets better. The Lakers get better. The Suns get better. The Grizz get better. The Mavs get better. Really, the Kings, not really better. Clippers, probably about the same. I mean, this is what you're looking at in the Western Conference. And the Blazers are one of the very few teams that you can point at them and say, this team clearly got worse, and they're due for a regression. So I realize that it's a weird number to say the under on 41.5. I'm not that strong on it. But, this is a team that outperformed what their actual day-to-day suggested they should have been this last year. It's also worth mentioning, by the way, that they play in just an hellacious division. Not that matters a whole lot since you play most of the teams in your own conference 4 times, but you definitely play the teams in your own division 4 times, and they're locked in there with the Jazz, the Nuggets, the Thunder, and the Wolves. That is 16 bone-crushing games that are going to be really difficult. I mean, could you really see them winning more than 6 of those games? You put 10 losses on the docket already. It becomes real tough to get into those mid-40s and win. So I think Portland takes a step back. This number is really, really low, and I think this is one of those situations where it's kind of low for a reason, but it's so low that it eliminates any value, really. So this is a soft play for Portland on the under. I do think Yusuf Nurkic continues to just sort of cap out. We've seen what he is. He is a stone-fisted, turnover-prone, slightly injury-prone big guy who can get it going for about a month at a time. All right, well, that's your tease. That leaves us only 5 teams to cover on Monday's show. That will then get us through the sports betting segment of the offseason, and we can really hunker down and talk about fantasy basketball. Coming up on tomorrow's pod, talk to Neil Rochelani to see what's gone on his brain over the last week or so. And then Neil and Adrian, actually, as we recorded this podcast late on Tuesday night, they are in a mock draft with some of you guys, listeners and members of the Hoopball community. They'll be recapping that mock on Friday's pod. It'll be our first mock recap show, first of many here in the 7-week lead up to NBA opening day. Once again, a big thank you to Zach Feldman for taking some time to hop on the pod tonight, give us a little intro to sports analytics in NBA. We'll dig a little bit deeper next time. Every time he's on the pod, we'll tear off another layer of the onion. I just want to make sure that we don't, I know that look, right? When somebody says something you don't understand and you start to nod and your eyes get a little bit glassy, I don't want that to happen. I want this to be a nice, fun, insightful way to add something to our NBA analysis repertoire. So again, Zach Feldman on Twitter, at ZachFeldman3. I'm at Dan Besbris. Go get the draft guide. It's outstanding. Hoop-ball.com is the website. Neil and I will talk to you tomorrow. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.